everyone, welcome back to my channel and welcome to another video. Feels like long time no see over on this channel. Since I wrapped up Vlogmas, I haven't filmed any book content. I didn't do a December reading wrap up. I didn't do a January TBR. So we've got a little bit of content to catch up on, which is really fun. First thing before I get into the video, I do just want to say I am filming this in a new setup. I will at some point, once it's finished, have a video over on my planning channel where I will show you the process of us setting up my new office, which is in our conservatory. I have moved my books in here, which is really fun. I mean, the ones all fit. They're not all in here. And then I do have my planning stuff kind of in that corner and my work stuff over there. So yeah, there will be a proper tour on my planning channel if you want to see it. I am filming this after my normal full-time job. So it is about 6 o'clock. And even though this room is really good for natural light, when it's pitch black outside, not so much. So the lighting is not so great in here right now. I apologise, but I really would like to get this video up. So I decided I'm just going to put up with the yellow lighting. You don't mind too much. Also, I apologise. I sound so bunged up. I've had the cold that is going round. So that's been very painful and irritating. And I'm just really struggling to shake it now. Also, yes, to address the elephant in the room, I am wearing a Christmas jumper on the 1st of February. So let's move on. So my plan for this video is to take you through everything I read in December and January, because I didn't do a December reading wrap up, but also I didn't read a ton in December, and 2 of the books I read I actually finished in January, and so they would have been in the January video. And I just decided that they could all just kind of merge into one and we would do just one big wrap up. I read 3 books in December, kind of finished 3 books in December. One of those I predominantly read in November. And then I finished 11 books in January. So I had a much better January. I have fallen off the wagon a little bit with reading in the last couple of weeks, and we'll talk a bit about that. But in the main, pretty good reading month for January in particular. 11 is the most I've ever read in a month. Yeah, because August was the best other than that, which was 10. So 11 is really good. Very happy with it. Got some very fun books to talk about. So the first book that we're going to talk about, I predominantly read in November, but finished in December. So it's in this video, but I've spoken about it in quite a lot of videos. It was in my best books of 2022 videos, so you can actually hear me talk about this quite a lot. So I'll keep it relatively short, but that is The Boyfriend Material by Alexis. I love this story. That's probably obvious as it was in my favourite books of the year, but it's so good. I rated it 5 stars, obviously. So we follow Luke and Oliver, and Luke is really down on his luck, I would say. He's been really struggling with his kind of professional and personal image. His dad kind of abandoned him when he was a child, and he has a lot of unresolved issues around that. And his dad is making a comeback and sort of reforming his life, and Luke is kind of feeling really put out by that. And he works for a charity, and basically this charity, a lot of the donors decide that based on the sort of public stuff that's coming out about Luke, they don't want to donate to the charity anymore. And so his friend recommends he gets in a fake dating relationship with her other friend, who's a barrister, so that he can kind of reform his image, basically. And I figured out in 2022 a lot of the things that I love, and the fake dating trope is absolutely one of them. If you have any recommendations for fake dating books you love, send them my way. I want to read them. But what I really think my favourite trope is what to me reads as decent mental health rep. This book just didn't shy away from that. Both Luke and Oliver have their own mental health challenges. I'm probably a bit more of an Oliver, but I can see parts of myself in Luke as well. I just really related to both of them. They were late 20s, kind of close to my age, and I could just understand the struggles that they were going through. And I just really loved that. The main thing though that I kind of really got out of this book is it was just so witty. Alexis Hall's writing is very dry humour, and I was reading this on the commute and I was really, really laughing out loud. And it's very rare that I do that, because I'm just someone that's kind of, you know, a quiet smile, sure, but I don't necessarily laugh out loud. And this book was just, it was so funny. I just fell in love with the characters from the first page. I felt it was really accessible. I know this book isn't for everybody, but I really loved it. I do have the sequel, and I think I'm like working myself up to like, what if I don't love it as much? Even though I know it doesn't matter, I could just pretend it doesn't exist. But I think I'm working myself up to it. But I have bought a couple more of Alexis Hall's books as well, because I just think this is someone who gets me, who writes characters that I love, who writes in a way that I love. So very excited to read more from this author. So that was an absolute winner to start the month off with. So that's Boyfriend Material by Alexis Hall. Next up, we have The Merry Christmas Christmas Project by Cathy Bramley. This was one of the books that was on the video that I did at the beginning of December, which was the festive books I wanted to read this month. And I think this was like one of two that I actually read. I think I need to, this year, read my Christmas books in November. I need to make sure I get to them. I have the same sort of issue with Christmas movies. I don't start early enough. So I need to start in November with my Christmas reads because I just didn't really manage my December well enough. I took 2 weeks off work and I mostly read on my commute. So if I'm off work, I don't read as much. So I just wasn't able to get through as many. But anyway, the one I picked up was Merry Christmas Project. And this book's pretty cute. Basically, we have, what are their names? Mary and Cole, of course, Christmassy names. And this book, I would say, gives me quite sort of Hallmark Christmas movie type vibes, if you like that sort of thing. So Mary has moved to this town and she ends up getting involved in the town's like Save Christmas type project, and they put on this like Merry Christmas event. And Cole is the kind of, I don't think I would call this grumpy sunshine. He's just a guy that lives in the town, but he ends up being her landlord. It's not that kind of romance, but ultimately he is her landlord. And they kind of end up meeting, and he's really handy, and so he ends up being able to help her with some elements of the stuff that she's doing. I feel like this was quite hard to explain now I think about it, but it's that type of story. And yeah, it passed the time for sure. It was a pretty quick read. I gave it 3 stars. It's not my favourite thing I've ever read. I think the story progressed a little bit weirdly at times. The pacing kind of, we went from like nothing to we're going to be together forever very quickly. But I did really like both characters, particularly Cole. He's a single dad. His kids live in America now with their mum Lydia, and I really felt for him. I really felt for what he was trying to do. So, you know, that was really fun. And Mary was very likable. There was a lot of trigger warnings in this story. There was like a lot of heavy stuff. It wasn't like quite as sort of as soft as I thought it was going to be. So that was a bit of a shock. I wasn't really expecting that. And as I say, the pacing wasn't my favourite. The writing wasn't necessarily my preferred writing style. It also hinted at being very steamy, and then there were no steamy scenes. And I always find that a little bit odd. It's like, tone it down a bit or have the steam. I kind of don't like the books that are like really teetering on the edge. But yeah, it passed the time. I'd recommend it, but I'm probably going to unhaul it because I don't think I'd reread it, but it was absolutely fine while I read it. So that is The Merry Christmas Project by Cathy Bramley. Next up, we have the book that I read for my vlog, Blind Date with a Book, which I really enjoyed doing. So if you haven't seen that vlog yet, I would recommend checking it out because it's just really fun. And I linked to an Etsy shop in there that does this kind of thing, and I would definitely do it again. So let me know if you'd like to see that. Not necessarily at Christmas, just like any time of year. But that is The Christmas Wedding Guest by Susan Mallory. I much prefer the UK cover for this. I assume this is the UK cover. Yeah. But the US cover that I've seen on Goodreads, I was like, I much prefer the UK one. So this is, I actually haven't really read a romance like this, at least recently, in my kind of return to reading, but it's a 4 point of view book. So we have these 2 sisters, and then we have the respective men in their lives. And I thought I wouldn't enjoy that many points of view, but I actually did. I liked the insight into all the characters. I felt I knew all of them. Basically, Reggie is visiting her parents in the town that her sister Dina lives in, and her parents are having a sort of wedding vow renewal type thing. And so she's going to be helping to organise that. She ends up running into her boyfriend from school who she hasn't seen in all this time, and it sort of brings back some feelings. And then Dina has chosen to have a baby on her own, and so we're sort of following that story. But there is a pop star called Micah who comes to stay in the town over Christmas to write a Christmas #1, very, very holiday movie. And don't they need to be written earlier in the year? I don't know, anyway. And he stays at the B&B that Dina runs, and so they kind of hit it off from there. And the stories are very different, which keeps it interesting. You're kind of constantly wanting to know more about what's happening with Reggie and Toby, what's happening with Dina and Micah. And so I really liked those elements of it. So I gave this like 3.75 stars. Like I think it's a little bit long. It probably could have been 100 pages shorter. It's a little bit repetitive with some of the kind of internal monologue drama, but very fun, like easy to read. It was another example of one that goes very borderline steamy and then no steamy scenes, and then we go from kind of 0 to 100 in the last couple of pages. And it was like, oh, okay. So, you know, that pacing maybe wasn't quite right, but in the main, I think this is very enjoyable. I would absolutely recommend reading it. If you want to hear me talk about more about it, then do check out that vlog. That is The Christmas Wedding Guest by Susan Mallory. Next up we have, we're kind of into books that I started in December and ended up finishing in January now. This is A Merry Little Meet Cute, which is by Julie Murphy and Sierra Simone. This is a very popular book in the book internet space. So this was something that a lot of people were reading over Christmas, and so I did end up picking it up and pushing it into my lineup above other books that I probably should have read that I already owned, because I just kind of wanted to keep up with the discourse about it. So in this story, we follow B, who is a sex worker, and she ends up kind of getting roped in by the guy that kind of runs the agency that she kind of does her sex work for. He ends up needing to basically come into some money. He's got to pay for his kids to get through university. And so he decides to set up a film company or get in partnership with an existing kind of Hallmark Christmas movie type company, and ends up needing to use the people that work on his porn films he needs to like actually move them across into working in the Hallmark Christmas films when there is a sort of big accident that happens and a lot of people are no longer able to work. So it's kind of that crossover. And so B ends up being the lead actress in the like Hallmark Christmas movie, and she is playing opposite a co-star who is a sort of, think like a sort of Harry Styles, I think a kind of like tween, teen, young adult star who ended up in a sex scandal which basically prevented his career, and he's in desperate need of money because his mum is really ill and it's the States and therefore has to pay a fortune for her healthcare. So it's a very interesting premise of story, and I was really excited to read this because I love Hallmark Christmas movies. I think it, like, you know, it's really interesting to read books that kind of promote positive sex work, and I actually have another book that I read in January which is along this topic. So just like all kind of very interesting. But I didn't love this, I think, as much as a lot of other people did. The reviews are mixed, but in the main are pretty positive on Goodreads. And I think this story, there was just elements of it that were just not for me. I liked the elements that were kind of looking at the Hallmark Christmas movie. I very much pictured this as like, what's the, I wrote it down, the Night movie on Netflix that has Vanessa Hudgens in it. I felt like it was that type of movie that we were making in this. If you like steam, there's steamy scenes in this. Being a book about promoting the positivity of sex work, there are steamy scenes in here. So if you like reading about those, there's a fair amount of them in this book and not just at the end. So, you know, you definitely kind of get your fill in that sense. I think the case for me, it just wasn't quite the book for me. I just wasn't desperate to finish it. When I really like a book, I'll stay up to like 2, 3 a.m. reading it, which is ultimately not good, but it's how I kind of know. I really want to know what happens to the characters. And this one took me quite a while to read. I mean, it could have been 100 pages shorter, to be honest, but I typically like my romances around 300 pages, not 400. But I just wasn't that desperate to find out what happened to the characters. I felt I could kind of see where it was going. We had some inevitable third act drama. I just kind of wasn't really here for that. I still gave it like 3.5 stars. Don't get me wrong, still enjoyed it. It just wasn't my favorite thing that I've ever read. But yeah, and I think it almost went too far in the promotion of being bisexual and the promotion of positivity of sex work. Like, I'm all for that. It was just, it like kept bringing it up in a way that was like, I was just here. I know, I read it. So I felt it was like, you're probably preaching to the converted choir already in this story. So I probably didn't need it repeated that many times. And also, and this is not really the fault of this book, it's a general comment, but, you know, as someone who is curvy, I absolutely like to read about characters that are curvy and fat. I'm very up for that kind of representation. However, I would like to read a story where it is not about that person being called out for being bigger than average. Like, people can just be curvy and fat, and whilst I understand that obviously as someone in that category that you get comments made and all that kind of thing, I just don't understand why that needs to be every story. You know, it's not something that plagues my personal life every single day, And therefore I don't necessarily want every book that I read about a character who's of bigger than average size to be about how they're publicly shamed for being big. So that was just like, more, you know, I kind of just would have liked, I would just generally like a story that features a character who is curvy or fat, that isn't about, like, it's not the defining feature of their entire story. It's just like, cool, that's who they are. Let's like focus on a different part of the plot, if that makes any sense. I don't know if it does, but anyway, this was fun. I'm probably going to unhaul it because I don't think that I will read it again, but you know, I can definitely see there's an audience for this. So that is A Merry Little Meet Cute by Julie Murphy and Sierra Simone. So next up we have Meet Me in London by TV's Toff, Georgia Toffolo. I don't know what Georgia is from. I think Made in Chelsea, because this book is set in Chelsea. So I'm going to assume she's from Made in Chelsea, but I don't really watch Made in Chelsea or Towie or anything like that. So I don't know who she is, and I didn't buy it for that reason. I bought it because it was like £2 in the works and I liked the cover. And so I was kind of interested to read it. So we have Victoria and Oliver. So they run into each other one night. Victoria's working in a bar. Oliver is very drunk. He's very annoyed after work and drinks too much, and basically professes to being in love with her and wanting to marry her after just meeting her. The following day, they then run into each other again. But they run into each other literally. And to kind of make it up to her, he agrees to take Victoria into the department store that she doesn't know at this point he is the manager of. Victoria she works in this bar mostly, but she's also very into fashion, and that's what she wants to do, is her own business. So he takes her into the department store, and then I think he reveals that he's working in the department store and asks her if she will agree to fake date him, because basically his dad is very ill and they're very obsessed with him settling down. And so in order to kind of get his mum off his back and stop setting him up on dates, but also to kind of help please his dad, he decides that he's going to pretend that he is with Victoria. And Victoria agrees to do it because he says that if she does, he will agree to host a fashion show of her designs at his department store. I'm not sure if I can remember if that is why she agrees, or he's offered her that opportunity and then she feels like she needs to say yes because of that opportunity. But so anyway, she agrees to do it and feelings catch from there. So I don't think I should have enjoyed this book as much as I did. I feel like people are going to look at this and the fact that I rated this 4 stars and that there were 2 books before this that I rated less than this. But I just enjoyed it. You know, I think it knew what it was, and it was a little bit, you know, it was a little bit steamy, but not too steamy without then going into detailed steam scenes, which is kind of what I think works if you're going to do it. And I really believed in Victoria and Oliver, and I thought they were both really likable. And, you know, some of it was kind of ridiculous. Like there's the backstory around it being that he basically pulls the wool over his dad's eyes that he's in a relationship with this woman. And then he's not, and his dad is like on death's door. You know, there's like an element of that reads very weirdly. But ultimately, you kind of understand it in the story, in my opinion. I kind of got it. I knew where Oliver was coming from with it. And you really believe that Victoria was like adding to his life. So it was fun. What can I say? So it's actually part of a series of 4 books. And I happen to own the second one because I bought it without realizing it was the second one for £1 in the works. So yeah, I already have the second one. And the only thing I didn't like about this is there's basically this big accident that happens pre-story, but it's referenced all the time. And it's linked to like why these 4 stories exist. So like I kind of get it, but it does mean that, yeah, it's kind of interwoven in a way that feels like we are trying to set you up for a series here, and they're constantly referencing the other characters to kind of make you want to read the other 3 books, I think. But, you know, I can't blame Toff. I'm sure she's a good business person. And, you know, you could tell that some bits were written by her and some bits were written by her, like, ghostwriter partner. And that is, like, mentioned at the beginning that there is, like, another writer. And it doesn't always read seamlessly. And, you know, sometimes I think, oh, you haven't really edited this very well because this thing is not explained well. But I still enjoyed it. What can I say? And I will absolutely read more of the series. So that is Meet Me in London by Georgia Toffolo. Okay, so those were like books that I carried over from December into January. And then we got into the beginning of January and I was like, okay, how am I going to kick my January off? And I decided that how I was going to do that was finally reading the Ali Hazelwood novellas. So this is the physical book that has the 3 novellas in it. So this is called Loathe To Love You, but it has 3 novellas, Under One Roof, Stuck With You, and Below Zero. And I read all 3 novellas back to back, which, was that smart? I don't know. So let me give you just a brief rundown of my history with Ali Hazelwood. So I read The Love Hypothesis as like the 2nd book I read in 2022 because it was the thing to read on BookTube before I even had BookTube. And I loved it. I loved The Love Hypothesis. I loved Ali Hazelwood's writing. I thought Olive was a incredibly fun and like believable character. I loved the situation she ended up in with the Adam Driver character. And is his name Adam? I don't know. Anyway, and I just loved it. Okay, I really loved it. The only reason I didn't give it 5 stars was because I didn't like the constant reference to being big or small. But otherwise I loved it. I then read Love on the Brain, and there's a vlog up on my channel of me reading that. And I only rated that 2.75 stars because I really didn't like Bea as much. I just didn't find her as likeable as Olive, and that was a big part of the problem. I felt the story had some like weird, unnecessary 3rd act drama that I just didn't need. And then also the big small thing carried on. And you start to question whether Ali Hazelwood has an issue with curvy people. And I don't know. I don't know her, so how do I know? But having read all 3 of these, you really can start to draw the conclusion that she possibly does. And I think there's one final book in this like STEM novella series, which is well, in this like overall university type thing, which is Love Theoretically, which is coming out later this year. I'll absolutely read it. I'll pre-order it. It's fine. I know who I am, okay? But I think that will be the same because you can kind of tell from the cover. I hope that after that, Ali Hazelwood can move into a new era of her life, which is not quite so sizist, because it becomes quite damaging to read if you're not small after a while. And I have no issue with the fact people are small, totally fine. But the cross-section of all of these women being in STEM and being that tiny, and the men them being incredibly ripped and over 6 foot tall, just didn't sit right with me. But anyway, I did enjoy all 3 of these more than I enjoyed Love on the Brain, and thus we consider that progress. And maybe that's because they were novellas and they were over quicker. I don't know. I'm not sure I should have batch read them, but you know, in the main, I enjoyed them more than Love on the Brain, and that was great. So I think the one I enjoyed the most was the first one, which is Under One Roof. So in this one, and all the girls are friends, so that's like another thing about it. So that's kind of fun. You know, you get references to the others' lives in the other books. So in this one, we have Mara, whose PhD supervisor leaves her a house, but leaves her half a house. And so she goes there expecting she'll be able to have the whole house. And then she gets there and realises that her PhD supervisor's grandson or cousin or uncle or like whatever is living in the house, and he doesn't want to leave it. And she's like, well, I don't have anywhere else to live. And so she kind of forces her way in there to move in. The premise is a bit weird, but I found Mara and Liam the most likeable characters. I felt like I could really understand Liam. Like, you could totally understand why he'd be so pissed off that this woman is trying to move into his home. Like, I could totally get that. And I felt their relationship progressed the most over time in a way that I would expect it to. I felt like we got a good balance of, we've kind of gone for, we're strangers, we're learning to live together, and that becomes something more. You know, there's a little bit of like Insta attraction there, but not something that Liam acts on. And so I just really, yeah, I just kind of believed them. I got it. And I really liked it. I gave it 4 stars. And, you know, I think I could have read a whole book of those 2. The others I was fine with being novellas, but this one I'm like, actually, I could have read a full story of you 2. You're so super cute. If you haven't read an Ali Hazelwood before, I personally, what I really like about her books is the steam scenes. They are very real, and mistakes are made, or, you know, they're not perfect. The sex isn't perfect, and I really like how Ali Hazelwood writes those. I just think it's like part of the biggest selling points of her books. All her characters are kind of quirky and little and that kind of thing. So, you know, that's endearing in the first one. I don't know how endearing it is by the time you're on the 5th of those. But yeah, in the main, I did like really enjoy this particular one. So then we have Stuck With You, which is the second one. And this one I kind of rated like 3.5 stars-ish. I think this is a lot of people's favourite, Stuck With You, but I think it was my least favourite of the three. So in this one we have Sadie and Eric, and Sadie is going into a pitch meeting and she needs her pre-pitch croissant, and Eric has it and then he gives it to her, and then she's kind of fascinated with him and is like, you gave me your croissant, and I can't say that word today, and they end up hitting it off, and they have like a sort of it's very kind of instant connection because they end up sleeping together on the first day. And then the story, all three of them actually flip timelines, so we're in the future telling the story in the past, which I don't mind. Again, I don't know that I needed all three of them to be exactly the same, but I don't really mind it. And this one, it's basically they're in current time, they're stuck in a lift together, and then it's going back to the like night they slept together and telling that story. And you know, they're very cute, and I think, you know, you can kind of get on board with that. I think the issue for me with this one is that the flitting back in the timeline meant that you're at hatred. And I think Sadie and Eric, because all of these are kind of hate to love, because that's the kind of thing with Ali Hazelwood. And I think that in the case of this one, Eric, like Sadie hates Eric in a very third act drama-y kind of way, but you know about the third act drama from the beginning because of the current time going back to the previous times. I just kind of wasn't here for it. I found Sadie irritating, that I was like, if you just spoke to Eric, I think you could have sorted out this particular drama. It was kind of one of those like misunderstanding tropes. And that's not my favourite thing to read. And I just wasn't really here for it. So that was the second one. And then the third one, again, I was back up to 4 stars at this point. So clearly I was feeling generous again. And in this one, we have Hannah. So Hannah is a NASA engineer, and she goes on this really dangerous expedition that she is like way too dangerous and she shouldn't go on it. And again, we're flipping timelines. So in real time, she is like stuck down this massive crater, and the guy, what is his name? Ian. Ian basically is coming back to save her. And so it's telling the story of basically Ian and Hannah meet when she goes to, I think they meet at NASA, and then they kind of end up on, her PhD supervisor or someone at school or something encourages her to go and interview someone working at NASA as part of like career development. And she interviews Ian, and they really hit it off. They have this like very flirtatious, not quite sex first meeting, and then doesn't see him again for ages. And then they kind of reconnect. And then again, it is the kind of misunderstanding thing of she thinks that Ian blocks her funding for her project, which is kind of why she ends up going on this super dangerous exhibition. And actually he was just trying to stop her from doing something reckless. So yeah, definitely the first one was my favourite. When you explain the Hannah and Ian one, I think it almost sounds a little bit silly, but you know, it was still fun, and I liked Hannah and Ian. I think Hannah was quite different to the other two. She kind of has some different types of issues, and so those were kind of interesting to read. Ian was very lovable. He was very sweet. He really cared for Hannah. So that was cute. And he was like probably the sort of nerdiest of the three, and I just found him like very endearing. So I think he was very cute. So yeah, those are my opinions on the novellas. I am still really anticipating reading Love Theoretically. Like if someone asked me what are the books you're most looking forward to this year, it would be Love Theoretically and Secretly Yours by Tessa Bailey are like the things I can think of off the top of my head. I will absolutely read it as soon as it comes out. I'll probably drop everything, but then I will look forward to Ali hopefully doing some different stuff in the future. Also, I'm counting this as 3 separate books, like just to be clear. So then I read The Flatshare by Beth O'Leary. I think this was on the books, I think so with the Feminist novellas, but one of the books I most wanted to read in 2023 because I know that there's a show or a movie now, and I want to watch that, but I can't watch it until I'd read the book. I wanted to read the book first. And so I just thought, yeah, you know, now I've finished the novellas, let's move away from Ali Hazelwood, let's try a different author. So we went with Beth O'Leary. I've not read anything by Beth O'Leary before. You've probably heard of this. This is a very, very popular book, but if you haven't, Tiffy breaks up with her boyfriend. It's a very toxic relationship that she has with, I think his name's Justin. and she needs somewhere to rent really cheaply, and Leon is renting his room during the night, and while he works on night shifts at a, I can't think of the word where he worked, like a palliative care centre. It's not like a hospital, but that kind of like nursing home, but for palliative care. To make enough money, I think, that's linked to his brother, he needs to make some more money, and so he rents his flat out while he's not there, basically, and so they will be sharing a bed. And they write post-it notes to each other. That's how they communicate, and they sort of get to know each other through the post-it notes, and they don't meet until like halfway through the book. And so you're kind of learning a lot about both their lives. You get a lot of backstory. Both of them have a lot of stuff they're dealing with. We've got Tiffy dealing with Justin, and it's quite difficult to read as like the toxic relationship element. You kind of want to shake her and be like, Tiffy, like, how are you with this man? Can't you see he's toxic? But that's what toxic relationships are like. And so whilst it's difficult, it is interesting to read. And then Leon has a backstory with his brother who is in prison, and Leon believes fundamentally he shouldn't be in prison. And then he has a sort of strained relationship with his girlfriend Kay, and so it's about him figuring those things out. And then him and Tiffy sort of getting to know each other. They're very different personalities, but getting to know each other from a distance through the stuff they leave in the flat or the notes that they write. It's just a really interesting concept. I don't know if people do this in real life, but very interesting. I thought it was a little bit long. It's another one that's 400 pages, and it could have been 300 pages. But, you know, Tiffy and Leon are very cute, and Leon's writing style is written very differently, and that's really good from the perspective of trying to like really understand their different personalities. But it's quite hard to read Leon's chapters, at least in the first part of the book. I think his writing style merges more with Tiffy's later on, but I found it really hard to get into his chapters, as much as I could see why Beth O'Leary was doing it, and it's very interesting. I found it quite hard to get into those chapters. But yeah, so I rated it like 3.75/4 stars. There's not really that much of a reason for that. I just kind of always felt on the periphery of their relationship rather than totally involved in it. And there's some very like big third act drama, which is resolved quickly, which is good. But also I'm kind of never really a fan of third act drama, because it gets resolved. There's like a misunderstanding that gets resolved very quickly in like the next chapter. And then you're kind of like, oh, you were going to like drop your whole relationship based on this, and then you were fine. And I just didn't really need that drama in there. The book could have been shorter for me and been a bit fluffier, and I probably would have been happier. But, you know, in the main, I've really enjoyed this. I would definitely recommend it. I don't think I would ever reread it, but it was very enjoyable, and I'm really looking forward to the show/film, whatever it is. So that is The Flatshare by Beth O'Leary. Next up, I finished an audiobook, which again, I had been reading. I actually think I'd been listening to it, oh no, since the end of November, and that was Agatha, Raisin and the Potted Gardener, which is the third book in the Agatha Raisin series by M.C.Beaton. And I just listened to these as like fun extra listening. Basically what I do is I read on my commute, and then I have like a 10-minute walk to the office, so I need an audiobook that's really easy to pick up for that kind of thing. And so, you know, the Agatha Raisin books are like pretty easy to listen to. I've said it before, I'm not going to go into like much about the story, but it's basically the kind of original cozy mystery, or at least it's like came out in like 1992, so I consider it to have been out for a while. And it's that kind of small town like murder mystery. It is a little bit old-fashioned, you know, because it came out in 1992. They're as old as me, and the world was a different place when I was born, and it was more racist and sexist and things like that. And so there's some elements of it that I don't love. This one had a very graphic death as well, and I felt really weird about it. And I just ultimately, it was one where I wasn't as invested. Like the first book in the series, I was really like interested in finding out who did it, but in this one, I kind of wasn't as bothered. So yeah, it was fine. I gave it 3 stars, I think, which is probably typically what I will rate these. I did decide after this to take a break from Hamilton. I did decide to take a break and listen to Spare instead. So I'm not necessarily going to give my full review of that here, because I'm still listening to it. My word, it takes a while to get through. But it's Spare, which is the biography by Prince Harry. And yeah, it's taken me a little while to get through, so I didn't finish it in January, but that's ultimately what I've switched to, and I'll probably talk about that in my February wrap if I finish it. And then I will go back to Agatha Raisin or to something else. Somebody recommended a murder mystery earlier on today, Lady Hardcastle Mysteries. I think it was Megwood book, so maybe I'll switch to that instead for a little while or something like that. So next up we have an audiobook another audiobook, but I've been listening to this one since the 15th of July. So this is Eragon by Christopher Paolini, and I did read Eragon, or we read it as a family, or listened to the audiobook or something when it came out originally, but I don't remember it that well, and it still is there a lot in like Waterstones and stuff, and so I thought, oh yeah, this could be a good one to listen to on audiobook, because fantasy books are typically what I listened to on audiobook as a child, so I thought it would be a good option. But I realised quite quickly that it wasn't one that I could listen to on my commute, because you can't really pick it up in 10-minute bursts. So I needed to listen to it only when I had a really concentrated amount of time ahead of me. And that was basically only when we drive to Newcastle to see Stuart's family. So I only really listened to it on those trips. And so it just took me a while to get through. It's quite a long book on audio. And this, I only really realised recently that I can cope with listening to an audiobook slightly faster than 1x speed. I can do like 1.2. It's because at first it feels, you know, it sounds so different, but then once you get settled, it feels normal. I've actually had this experience with Spare, that I was listening to that on 1x speed because I didn't think Harry sounded right sped up. And then I sped him up again the other day and I was like, this is preferable. So yeah, I did listen to it a little bit faster in the end to get through it. Overall, I really enjoyed it. I rated it like 3.5 stars, which feels a little bit harsh because, to be honest, for like 2/3 of the book, it was a 4-star book for me. But the last third is like action after action. There's like Eragon, and if you don't know the story, basically Eragon finds a dragon in the forest and hatches the egg in, well, he finds an egg, he hatches it into a dragon called Saphira, and then it's basically about his story with Saphira and him finding out more about his background and about the dragon riders, and that's kind of effectively the story. And it's like action scene after action scene after action scene, and like Eragon's like on this adventure with his companion, and then there's like something else happens, and it was just too much for me, honestly. It needed to be a little bit shorter for me, and it just felt, it was just too much. It was too relentless. Like, I couldn't keep up. So I think, going to still listen to the rest of the books, but I'm kind of thinking I'm not going to prioritise them, which is sad because I only really remember the first one. I would like to read the others, but they get so much bigger from here. The final one is like so chunky, and it would take me so long to get through it. So maybe I need to be in a time of my life where I can listen more concentrated to audiobooks. I don't know, but it was fun, and I think I would have rated it 4 stars if it wasn't for the final third. But overall, I rated it 3.5 stars. Next up, we have one of the books that I bought when I was in Florida at Barnes & Noble, and this is Mr. Perfect on Paper by Jean Meltzer. So in this book, we have Dara, who is a really successful business owner of a Jewish dating app. And her grandma go on to a program called Good News, which is her favourite news program. And they're interviewed by Christopher. And she is talking with her grandma about her app and promoting it, and then her grandma kind of interrupts and basically puts publicly out there a list that Dara sends to her sister, or wrote with her sister, about her perfect man. And they decide, grandma and Christopher, that they're going to go on a hunt and make it like a series on this Good News program to find Dara's perfect guy. And over the course of the story, she realises that her perfect guy may not be the perfect guy on paper. You can probably see where this is going. So I love the premise of this, and I really like the Jewish rep in this. It has a lot of references to Jewish culture, to the Jewish religion, and I learned a lot about being Jewish through the story, so that was very interesting. It also doesn't sort of baby you with it. It kind of assumes some element of knowledge, which sometimes was kind of hard to read, but, you know, makes you work for it a bit, and I'm okay with that. So I like those elements. I think it was just, you know, as usual, I'm a person that always just talks about pacing, and the pacing just didn't feel quite right for me. And to be honest, I just didn't really believe in Dara and Christopher. I wasn't totally rooting for them to get together. You're supposed to believe that Dara, so the other thing is that Dara has anxiety, and she constantly refers to it as generalized anxiety disorder, but it's constant. And it's like, I get it. I know from the first time you have GAD as a GAD sufferer, and I didn't need her to constantly keep saying that. I don't know if it was something very specific that they didn't want to like over generalize anxiety, and so they went with generalized anxiety disorder. I don't know if that phrase makes sense. Maybe you know what I was trying to get at, but they didn't want to sort of look like they weren't, you know, they were trying to like tarnish anxiety all with the same brush, but it was very constant reference to generalized anxiety disorder. And I have seen some reviews on Goodreads that kind of say it was being a bit too sort of general with it, or a bit too cliche about the anxiety. And I think more of my issue was around the fact that we didn't get a lot of time with Dara in particular. And so you're supposed to believe that her energy and power was completely infatuating for Chris. And I just don't think I saw that. I think Dara, you know, you could, yeah, understand her anxiety aspects, but I don't think that I could understand why Chris fell in love with her so quickly. You get a lot of backstory about Chris, and his wife passed away, and it's a lot about him dealing with the grief of that. And I didn't really realize that was going to be part of the story, and that's kind of hard to read because the wife passes away like quite not a long time before the book starts, and so there was like some of that I had to deal with. And there was a really weird scene where they're referring to his daughter, teenage daughter, and buying a bra, and it just had some very weird wording. So I'm like very gutted I didn't love this more. I gave it 3 stars because ultimately it was fine. I just, oh, so sad, like wibbly edition, but I'm not going to keep this. There's absolutely no way I would reread this, I don't think. So yeah, unfortunately I just didn't enjoy it, but I think there is an audience for this story, and I hope that some people do get a lot out of it. It's just, unfortunately, it wasn't for me. So that is Mr. Perfect on Paper by G. Meltzer. Okay, we're getting there. So the next one is The Bride Test by Helen Hoang. This is the second book in this series that is the Kiss Quotient series. So I gave the Kiss Quotient 3 stars. To be honest, I barely remember anything about it. I read it quite early on last year, and I think the main character met with Michael, who was a sex worker, to kind of get her to teach him some moves. I think it's the general premise of the story. But I don't remember that much about it, and it's like in my on-haul pile. But I decided that I'm trying to get through some more of my romance series. Whether I want to keep them or not, it's not really the point. It's just trying to get through some more of them. And so I just decided this was the one that I was going to pick up. I enjoyed this one a lot more than the Kiss Quotient. So in this one, we have Esme, who is working in Vietnam, and a random woman comes up to her and basically says, "Do you want to marry my son?" And this is obviously kind of hard to believe, but also I think very much does happen. And so you kind of have to suspend your like disbelief if you don't know anyone this has happened to, but I don't think it's like an unrealistic thing that can happen. And Esme wants a better life for her illegitimate daughter that she had with a man that left her. And, you know, her and her mum and her grandma and her daughter, they all sleep in the same room. And this woman offers her, you know, a better chance at life in America. So she decides to do it. She decides to go and marry this woman's son. And the son is, how are they related to the woman in the first one? I can't even remember the name of the woman in the first one, but so I can't 100% remember, but I think maybe is he a sibling? I don't think so. Or a cousin? Maybe a cousin. I think maybe a cousin. But it's Kai is the guy that we're following in this one, and he has autism. So this is kind of a trait in the Kiss Quotient as well. And, you know, I am not an Own Voices review, so please don't kind of take anything I say in that respect. But I personally felt the rep of Kai was all right. I think there were definitely some elements where it was kind of, you know, refreshing to read about someone with autism being represented in a story in this way. I think there were some elements where I kind of felt that I don't think that Kai would have been able to act in the way that he actually did in the cases of the story and things like that. And there was some what's the phrase I'm looking for? Some conveniences that I think were written into the story that actually went above plot points or things like that, just to kind of get the story moving. I kind of thought, I think that would have been a bit harder than it actually was to do that particular thing or whatever. But, you know, in the main, it was enjoyable. It's kind of difficult to say why I enjoyed this one so much, but, you know, Kai, I could kind of understand where he was coming from, and, you know, they both have quite a lot of backstory, and you're getting to know that, and you kind of do get invested in them getting together. And yeah, I just enjoyed it. I don't really know what else to say. So the third one apparently, the third one's called The Heart Principle. And the third one apparently is really emotional, makes loads of people cry. And I don't really know if I'm ready for that, but it would be good to have wrapped this series up so that I did start a series tracker, and it would be good to move forward with that. So I will probably try and read The Heart Principle quite soon. So that is The Bride Test by Helen Hoang. And last but not least, we have The Roommate by Rosie Danan. So I probably shouldn't have picked up another romance that's kind of part of a series. I don't know if you have to have read this one. No, yes, I think you probably do need to have read this one. Actually, I know what the second one's about. You probably do need to have read the first one. So I decided to pick this up. It was just one I just randomly went to my shelves and picked up on a whim. So in this book, we follow Clara, who basically moves halfway across the country to be with a guy who she's been in love with since forever. And as soon as she gets there, he basically turns around and is like, I'm going on tour with my band, so I've rented out my house and you'll be living with someone else. And that person ends up being Josh, who is a sex worker. So we're like back on this kind of story. And Clara is a kind of socialite, and she is kind of trying to sort of find who she is, and she doesn't know a lot of things, and she's a little bit naive. And Josh kind of instantly is attracted to her, but she is sort of very wary. She doesn't like want to ask him too many questions about what he does and doesn't want to come across naive. So one day she is watching some of his videos, and then they end up kind of hitting it off, and he ends up satisfying her. And from there, they then decide that actually they really both want to promote women's satisfaction in sex. And so they design a kind of website, and it basically, Josh is also struggling with work. There's a sort of corruption in the porn industry, and so he needs some work. And so they kind of go into this business plan together, and it's about them doing, like, coming up with this website and this platform that they're going to be using, whilst also dealing with the feelings that they have for each other. And yeah, like, in the main, this was pretty good. I gave it 4 stars. I would not recommend reading this on a commute. It is the steamiest book I have ever read. And like, I read a lot of romance, but this is very steamy. Josh is quite a sort of lovesick puppy, a lot of it, but you know, it's kind of cute, but he is a bit lovesick puppy, I would say. The writing around him gets quite cliche towards the end of the story, and it's like constant like metaphors, and Clara is like the blah, and Clara makes me feel this, and like to a point where I was like, okay, I'm kind of probably a bit like ready for this to be done now. But you know, in the main, it's kind of enjoyable. They're very different people. It's, you know, it's an easy read, and it has some unnecessary third act drama. I feel like all I talk about in these wrap-ups is pacing and third act drama, but it has some third act drama in here, which is very like, you know, real heightened drama, and then is resolved very quickly in a really like a Hallmark movie kind of way of like a that would never happen in real life kind of way. So I didn't really enjoy that, but in the main it was an easy read. I flew through it, so I felt like it was probably a 4 star. It's maybe like a 3.75, but like somewhere around there I felt it was enjoyable. So there we have it. Those are the books I read in December and January. Whilst I don't think I really read anything that was actually on the video of stuff I needed to read in December, I think that I did, you know, I read some festive books, so at least that's something. And I did read a fair number of books in January that were sort of books that I wanted to prioritize in 2023, so that's pretty fun. So hopefully I can stick with that. So yeah, pretty happy with that. In terms of books I'm carrying over into February, there's Spare, and I'm also reading Written in the Stars by Alexandria Belfleur. I was supposed to be reading this for a group of friends who are in a Discord. We had started a book club for this year, and I was supposed to read it for the book club, and then I was leaving it till later so that I would know what to say, like my opinions for the book club, because I read a fair amount, so I don't want to read it too early and then forget what happened. And I got sick and so I didn't go into work and didn't have a commute, and therefore didn't finish it. And so far I'm not totally invested, and so I feel like I'm possibly going into a bit of a reading slump. I don't know whether I've just read too many romances, not ideal going into February, but whether I've read too many romances or something and I need to read like a fantasy or something else. I'm not sure, but yeah, so I am trying to get through that. But those are the two books, and I'm still in the middle of Ariadne, but I've been in the middle of Ariadne for nearly a year, so I feel like we're just not going to talk about that. It would be great if I could finish it and get it off my list, but you know, we are where we are. So thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I would really appreciate a like. If you haven't already, I would love it if you would subscribe. In the description down below, I will have a link to my Goodreads, to my planning Instagram, and all that other kind of stuff, so do check that out if you want to kind of watch any of my other videos or follow me over on Instagram or anything like that. Otherwise, I'll see you in my next video. Bye.